was a Friday morning, and the sun was already shining brightly in the blue sky, heralding a hot day in the big city. Marina, a successful businesswoman, woke up early as usual. After a quick breakfast and a few work calls, she noticed that the fridge was almost empty. Despite her tight schedule, she decided she needed to go to the supermarket before starting her day at the office. Marina was a determined woman, the owner of a rising consulting firm, and always found a way to balance her personal and professional life. She dressed casually, tied her hair into a casual bun, and grabbed her car keys. The supermarket was just a few blocks from her house, a place she had frequented since moving to the neighborhood. Upon arriving at the supermarket, Marina took a deep breath, enjoying these simple moments away from work pressures. She grabbed a cart and began walking through the aisles, thinking about the week's necessities. She chose fresh fruits, vegetables, and some items for the special dinner she planned to prepare for her husband, Paolo. As she walked through the aisles, she noticed the people around her, each with their own stories and concerns. But something caught her attention. Near the dairy section, an elderly man in worn-out clothes with a confused expression on his face was looking at the products on the shelf with some hesitation. Marina glanced at him but continued on her way, focused on finishing her shopping quickly. When she reached the checkout, she was about to start placing her items on the conveyor belt when she noticed the same elderly man in front of her. He was fumbling with his wallet, searching for coins, clearly worried. The cashier, already impatient, was waiting. Marina, with her generous spirit, felt a sudden urge to help. She decided that even though she didn't know him, she would do something for this man who seemed so helpless. And thus, without knowing it, she was starting a series of events that would change her life forever. Marina waited patiently in line at the checkout, watching the elderly man in front of her. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to count some coins. The cashier, visibly impatient, sighed and drummed his fingers on the counter. The elderly man, noticing the frustration around him, grew even more nervous. He looked at the few items in his basket, a loaf of bread, a liter of milk, and some fruit, and went back to searching his already empty wallet. Marina felt a pang in her heart as she watched the scene. She knew she couldn't just ignore this moment. With a gentle smile, she leaned forward and lightly touched the man's shoulder. He turned slowly, his eyes filled with gratitude and surprise. "Let me help," Marina said gently, not giving him a chance to refuse. She took her card from her purse and swiped it through the machine, paying for both her groceries and his. The elderly man tried to protest, mumbling words of thanks mixed with apologies, but Marina just shook her head, smiling. "Don't worry, it's a pleasure to help," she said, feeling a wave of satisfaction as she saw the relief in the man's eyes. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes that said otherwise. "Thank you so much, my dear. God bless you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Marina felt an instant connection with the man, an inexplicable sense that this encounter was more than just a coincidence. Without hesitation, she decided to offer him a ride home to ensure he got there safely. As they left the supermarket side by side, Marina couldn't have imagined how profoundly that simple act of kindness would transform their lives. Marina and the elderly man walked together to the parking lot, where she opened the car door for him with a welcoming gesture. He got in with some difficulty, thanking her once again for her help. Feeling even more connected to him, Marina asked where he lived. I think it's on Acacia Street, but I'm not sure," he said, his voice trembling. Marina noticed the confusion in his words and decided that, besides taking him home, she needed to understand more about his situation. During the drive, she started a conversation trying to learn more about him. The elderly man said he couldn't remember much about his past, only flashes of a life that seemed distant. He mentioned that he had an accident years ago, and since then his memory had been failing. Marina listened attentively, her heart aching at his story. They arrived at a small house on Acacia Street, a simple but cozy place. Marina helped the elderly man out of the car and carried the groceries to the door. He searched his pockets for the keys and, with some difficulty, opened the door. The elderly man offered her a cup of tea, and while he prepared the drink, Marina looked at the old photos scattered around the living room. She noticed one photo in particular that caught her attention. It was of a young man with a smile that reminded her a lot of her husband, Paulo. She felt a chill run down her spine, but brushed off the thought, thinking it might just be a coincidence. They sat at the kitchen table, and the elderly man continued to share fragments of his memories. Marina, increasingly intrigued, asked about his family. The man spoke about a son he had lost contact with many years ago, ever since he had the accident and lost his memory. Marina felt a lump in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. She knew she needed to talk to Paulo about this encounter, but she didn't want to raise false hopes. She said goodbye to the elderly man with a promise to return soon to visit him. As she drove back home, Marina reflected on the series of coincidences that had led her to this man. A simple act of kindness had triggered a chain of events that seemed to have a greater purpose. Marina didn't know it yet, but that unexpected encounter was about to change their lives in ways she could never have imagined. In the following days, Marina couldn't get the elderly man out of her mind. Something about him and his story felt extremely familiar. She decided she needed to know more about him. So, on a quiet afternoon after a busy day at work, she returned to his house. He greeted her with a warm smile, visibly happy that she had kept her promise to come back. They sat down again in the kitchen, where he served the same comforting tea. Marina noticed how he seemed more relaxed, perhaps because he had someone to talk to. "So, sir, may I know your name?" Marina asked, realizing she hadn't asked before. "Sorry, where are my manners? My name is Antonio," he said with a shy smile. "Antonio," Marina repeated, feeling a wave of nostalgia at hearing that name. "You mentioned you have a son. Can you tell me more about him?" Antonio sighed, looking down at the tea in his hands as if seeking courage at the bottom of the cup. "My son's name is Paulo. The last time I saw him, he was just a young man. I had to travel for work and there was an accident. Since then, I don't remember much. All I know is that when I woke up, I was in a hospital and couldn't remember who I was or where I lived." Marina felt her heart race. Paulo. The name echoed in her mind like an alarm. Her husband was also named Paulo, and she knew he had lost his father under mysterious circumstances many years ago. "Antonio, do you know where your son is now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't. I looked for him when I started to recover some memories, but I never had any success. I only remember flashes of our time together, and it hurts me deeply." Marina remained silent for a moment, absorbing Antonio's words. She decided that she needed to tell Paulo about this discovery, but she knew she had to do it carefully. Antonio's story seemed to fit perfectly with Paulo's missing father, but she needed to be sure. "Antonio, can I come back tomorrow with someone?" she asked gently. He looked at her with a mix of hope and fear. "Of course, my dear, you have been so kind to me, I trust you." Marina left Antonio's house with a heavy heart, but also with renewed determination. When she got home, she found Paulo sitting on the couch, going through some work documents. She sat down next to him, took his hand, and began to tell him about meeting Antonio, trying to convey the delicacy and importance of the moment. Paulo listened attentively, and as Marina narrated the story, his eyes filled with tears. "Marina, do you think he could be my father?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know, Paulo, but I think it's worth finding out," she replied, squeezing his hand firmly. The next day, Marina and Paulo went back to Antonio's house together. As they approached, Paulo's heart beat faster, and Marina could feel the tension in the air. The reunion that was about to happen was filled with emotions, and both knew that this moment would change their lives forever. Marina and Paulo arrived at Antonio's house in the early afternoon. The sun was shining brightly, and a gentle breeze relieved the day's heat. Paulo was visibly nervous, his sweaty hands intertwined with Marina's. She could feel his anxiety and knew this moment would be crucial. Antonio greeted them with a smile, though his expression showed some confusion upon seeing Paulo. He invited them in and offered the usual tea while Marina and Paulo settled in the small living room. The space was simple but cozy, filled with memories of the past that Antonio struggled to reconnect. Marina began the conversation, trying to create a comfortable atmosphere. "Antonio, this is my husband, Paulo," she said softly. Antonio's eyes fixed on Paulo. There was something in the old man's eyes that Paolo couldn't look away from. He felt a strange familiarity, something that reminded him of old photos his mother showed him and the stories she told about his father. "Nice to meet you, Paolo," Antonio said, still a bit hesitant. Paolo, with a choked voice, asked, "Antonio, you said your son's name is Paolo, right? Do you remember anything else about him?" Antonio paused, closing his eyes as if trying to recall long-forgotten memories. "Yes, my son, Paolo. I remember him as a boy, always smiling. He loved playing in the backyard. He had a dog, Rex. They were inseparable." Paolo felt a wave of emotion upon hearing that. He had a dog named Rex when he was a child. "Antonio, do you remember any trip you took before the accident? Anything specific that might help us?" Antonio furrowed his brow, visibly struggling to retrieve the memories. "I was traveling for work, something about a construction project in another city. There was a storm and, after that, everything became confusing. I remember a hospital and the feeling of not knowing who I was." Marina watched closely, noticing how Antonio's descriptions matched the stories Paolo had told her about his father's disappearance. She decided to be more direct. "Antonio, do you remember any specific details about your family? Anything that could confirm your son's identity?" She knew it was a delicate but necessary question. Antonio looked at Marina and then at Paolo, his eyes filling with tears. "I remember a song we used to sing together, a lullaby. Paolo always asked me to sing it before he went to sleep. It was our little tradition." Paolo felt a chill run down his spine. That same lullaby his mother had sung to him many times, saying it was a gift from his father. With tears in his eyes, Paolo began to softly sing the melody. Antonio moved, joined in, completing the lyrics. The room was filled with an aura of nostalgia and emotion as forgotten memories began to light up in Antonio's mind. "Dad, is it you?" Paolo asked, his voice breaking with emotion. Antonio, with tears streaming down his face, simply nodded, unable to speak. Marina felt a wave of emotion wash over her, knowing she had played a crucial role in this miraculous reunion. At that moment, the truth was clear. Antonio's forgotten memories aligned with the stories Paolo carried in his heart. Finally, father and son were together again, ready to rebuild the history that fate had interrupted. The reunion between Paolo and Antonio was just the beginning of an emotional journey to uncover the past and understand what had truly happened all those years ago. Determined to fill in the gaps in Antonio's memory, Marina and Paolo decided to investigate the accident that had separated father and son more thoroughly. The next day, Marina began making calls. Using her network of contacts and investigative skills, she tracked down hospital and accident records from the time when Antonio disappeared. After several hours of searching, she found a hospital in a nearby city that had records of an unidentified patient admitted after a severe car accident about 25 years ago. Paolo and Marina decided to visit the hospital. There, they spoke with a retired doctor who had worked in the emergency room at that time. The doctor, while going through old files, vaguely remembered a man who had been brought to the hospital without any identification and no memory, after a car accident during a storm. He was in terrible condition when he arrived here, the doctor said. He had a severe head injury and several broken bones. He was in a coma for weeks. When he woke up, he didn't know who he was. Marina and Paolo listened attentively, absorbing every detail. The doctor continued, "We tried to find his family, but without any documents and no memory, it was impossible. He was transferred to a rehabilitation center, and after that, I lost contact. Their next stop was the rehabilitation center. There, they found a nurse who clearly remembered Antonio. He was one of our most challenging cases," she said. "He stayed with us for months, relearning basic things. He was a kind man, but he suffered a lot from his lack of memories. Gradually, he began to rebuild his life, but he never remembered his identity." As they spoke with the nurse, Marina noticed a folder of old files. She asked for permission to check it, hoping to find something more concrete. Among the time-worn papers, they found a handwritten letter. It was from Antonio, addressed to a Paolo, but never sent because he didn't know the address. "Dear Paolo, if this letter ever reaches you, know that it wasn't for lack of trying that I didn't come home. Something terrible happened and I lost my memory. Every day my heart aches thinking of you. I hope you are well and that we can reunite someday. With love, your father, Antonio. Paulo held the letter with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. The confirmation was there, in those words written so long ago. Marina felt a mix of sadness and relief as she saw the connection between past and present become clear. Back at Antonio's house, they showed him the letter. His eyes filled with tears as he recognized his own handwriting. "Did I write this?" he asked, his voice choking with emotion. "Yes, Dad, you did," Paulo said, hugging him tightly. "And now we are together again." With the past finally revealed, the family was ready to move forward. What had been lost over the years was beginning to be restored, and they were determined to make every moment count. Love and hope filled the space where pain and uncertainty once resided. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink as Marina and Paulo arrived once again at Antonio's house. Paulo's heart was racing, a mix of anxiety, hope, and love. Marina held his hand, conveying strength and confidence. Antonio was waiting for them on the porch, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if expecting something he couldn't quite explain. When he saw Paulo and Marina approaching, he stood up slowly, his eyes filled with emotion. Paulo walked up to his father, feeling the weight of 25 years of absence. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "I've waited for this moment my whole life." Antonio looked at his son, tears streaming down his face. "Paulo, my son, I don't know how I lost you, but I never stopped loving you. Every day that passed, even without knowing who I was, I felt like something was missing. Someone. Now I know it was you." The two embraced, a hug filled with all the unspoken words, all the repressed emotions, and all the pain that was now beginning to heal. It was a moment of pure reconnection, where time seemed to stand still, and the past and present merged into one reality. Marina watched the scene with tears in her eyes, feeling the depth of the reunion. She knew how much this meant to both Paulo and Antonio. The pain of separation, the struggle for survival, and the loss of memory were being replaced by love and the hope of a new beginning. "I never stopped looking for you," Paulo said, still holding his father. "Mom and we never gave up on you. She always believed that one day you would come back." Antonio squeezed his eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears. "I wish I had remembered sooner, had come back to you. But now I'm here, and I promise I will never leave you again." They pulled back slightly, just enough to look each other in the eyes. Paulo wiped the tears from his father's face. "We'll make new memories together, Dad. We'll make up for lost time." Marina, feeling it was the right moment, approached and hugged them both. "We're together now as a family, and that's all that matters." Night fell, but inside that house there was a light that would never go out. They sat at the table, talking and reminiscing, sharing memories and creating new ones. Antonio recounted the few memories he had, and Paulo filled in the blanks with childhood stories, adventures, and joyful moments he and his mother had experienced. It was a night of healing, unity, and love. The reunion was not just physical but also emotional and spiritual. Antonio was finally home, not just in a place, but in the hearts of the people who mattered most. And so, in that little house on Acacia Street, a family was restored. The painful past was left behind, giving way to a bright and promising future. Everyone knew that together they could face anything, because the love that united them was stronger than any adversity. The weeks following the reunion were a period of rediscovery and renewal for the family. Marina, Paulo, and Antonio began meeting regularly, each encounter strengthening the bonds that had been broken by time and circumstances. On a sunny Sunday, the family decided to have a picnic in the park, a place Paulo used to visit with his mother during his childhood. Antonio, now more animated and confident, was moved by every detail, recognizing the places and stories that Paulo and Marina shared. It was as if he was rediscovering his own life, piece by piece. Sitting on a checkered blanket surrounded by baskets of food and laughter, Marina watched the scene with a serene smile. She saw Antonio tell a story from the past that Paulo had never heard before, and saw Paulo laugh, his eyes shining with joy. She knew that this moment was the culmination of a difficult journey, but also the beginning of a new chapter full of possibilities. "Dad, do you remember that song you used to sing to me?" Paolo asked, his eyes filled with anticipation. Antonio smiled and nodded. Yes, I remember. You always asked me to sing it before you went to sleep. The two of them began to sing the familiar melody, and Marina felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the music or the words, but what they represented, the connection, the love, and the perseverance of a family that, against all odds, found each other again. Marina reflected on how it all started with a simple act of kindness. An impulse to help a stranger at the supermarket had triggered a series of events that changed their lives forever. She thought about the choices we make daily, and how often it is the small acts of generosity that have the greatest impact. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with a soft golden hue, Marina felt a deep sense of gratitude. She looked at Paolo and Antonio, now inseparable, and knew they had created something priceless together. A second chance, a new opportunity to be a family. We are here together for a reason, Marina said, her voice filled with emotion. We should never underestimate the power of love and kindness. They can change the world, one small gesture at a time. Antonio, his eyes shining, held Marina's hand. You saved my life, Marina, not just with your help that day, but with your love and determination to reunite us. Paolo nodded in agreement. Yes, Marina, you gave us the greatest gift of all, family, and I can never thank you enough for that. With their hearts full and hands intertwined, they remained silent, appreciating the beauty of the moment. They knew the future would still bring challenges, but they were ready to face them together, as a family. And so, under the starry sky, with laughter echoing around and the silent promises of a new beginning, they embraced the certainty that life, with all its uncertainties and surprises, is a precious gift. And in the end, what really matters are the bonds we create and the acts of love we share. Would you believe Antonio's story? Would you welcome him with open arms like Paolo did? Comment below what you would do, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.